Bonjour. Europe has some of the best universities in the world, and when you travel to any AI hubs in the States or in Asia, you're sure to run into engineers trained in France, in England, or elsewhere. Cutting-edge models and calculations are developed in European institutions, but we have to be honest, they don't always translate into startups or scale-ups. The entire Silicon Valley system was created as a spin-off coming from Stanford and Berkeley University. So how can Europe bridge that gap and use its academic and research excellence to accelerate its AI ecosystem? To answer this critically important question, here is Euronews senior tech reporter Pascal Davis and her guest, the vice president in charge of strategy for Imperial College, Amanda Volthuizen, the Director of Innovation, Startups and Investment at CEA and the board member of the European Innovation Council, Laurence Petit. It's been a very long day here at the Southern area. I have to apologize again. Pardon, Madame Petit. And the Vice President of AI at the University Paris-Saclay and Director of the DataIA Institute, Frédéric Pascale.
Thank you and welcome to this session. Firstly, thank you for having a session which is mostly women. It doesn't happen very often in tech, so much appreciated. So AI sovereignty obviously been one of, I think, the biggest topic here at VivaTech this year. Everyone's discussing it, particularly with regards to Anthropic last week and what this means. So the other thing that's also been mentioned is research and Europe's potential, and it's so strong in its researchers. So first, let's dive into what is AI sovereignty when it comes into the world of research. Let me start with you.
Thank you very much. And it's interesting, I feel like every session I go to, you get a slightly different definition, a slightly different lens on what you mean by AI sovereignty. But I think to your point around what it means for research, I think two things in particular. I think one is around the having your own research and innovation ecosystem to keep that research development and growth in your country and in your region. And I think probably that's something we'll touch on later, but I think that's absolutely critical to think about, not just within, in our case, within the UK, but actually then thinking about the AI ecosystem across Europe, so that if we are wanting to start to talk about that kind of critical mass needed to be truly competitive when it comes to AI innovation, you start to look at Europe as a whole, and then you start to have a player at the table that is the match of the US or China. So I think that is absolutely critical. And I think certainly from a UK perspective, when we were talking about joining the Horizon Europe, reassociating with Horizon Europe, that concept of that critical mass and maintaining that critical mass of research excellence was actually pivotal, I think, in winning that argument, certainly within the UK, but I think also with our European counterparts as well.
Okay, let me bring you in, Laurence. I know you're from a slightly different background. You're more kind of into the scaling up. So really vital to have your point here. What does AI sovereignty mean to you? Is it just a European project? Is it how some people describe it as Europe, Canada, India, and that? Or what do you think it is?
Well, it's actually it's quite funny because I was at lunch. I had exactly that discussion with several startups. I was invited to a lunch. And exactly the first question was, "What is a sovereignty?" So it rings a bell. Actually, and everybody said that really a sovereignty is not self-sufficiency, and it is not about rejecting foreign technologies. It's not about doing everything on our own, and actually it is impossible. It's really the ability to choose. And I think what was really interesting is that to remind that AI is not only a software, it is a comprehensive value chain. It is data, models, cybersecurity, energy, it is computing as well. So it's all the value chain. So if we talk about sovereignty, it really means having also sovereignty on all this value chain. So really, I would say AI sovereignty is the ability to choose and to have quite an independency on all this value chain.
And Frédéric, from Paris-Saclay University, one of the biggest institutions, you're leading AI research there. So I'm wondering, from your point of view, France, we see VivaTech, it's such a celebration of Frenchness and French tech. So from your point of view, what is AI sovereignty for France?
Thank you. So it's also funny, I don't know if we were at the same lunch, but it was also the topic at my table, especially I was with
Something, a key question at time being.
with some person from OVH, some person from AWS. So at the academic level at Paris-Saclay, it's very difficult to define sovereignty. But maybe the good approach is what has been said, but how to define a mix of technology, models, infrastructure, to ensure there's no strict dependency on any technology, either from a country, either from a company, and then the next step is really on which use cases, which type of data we have to define. At the university level, when we talk about data privacy, especially for the students, we have to keep the data really inside the university. So it's critical data. In that case, it's a very strict notion of sovereignty, in a sense that we keep everything, even the model, but for other aspects or use cases, of course, could be open. So it's, I would say for me, the definition is to have the good mix of technological, to avoid any technological dependencies.
And is that kind of Europe participating in that with other countries, or how do you define that? Is it country by country? Is it region by region? Or is it a mix? Or does AI sovereignty even exist?
I don't mind trying to take that on. I think you can, part of me sometimes wonders if you can get tied up in that question when actually we should be sort of coming at it from perhaps some of the different lenses. Obviously there is a certain amount of AI sovereignty that a nation needs to have, not at least for national security. There are applications of it where you must have that national capability. But I think to your point, Laurence, it is a whole supply chain. And I think we have to also realize that, we're here at VivaTech today, this whole ecosystem, the way that research works, the way that innovation works, it's really not actually worrying about boundaries and borders. It's thinking about, where do I get the talent, where do I get the investment, where am I finding the critical frontier research or the applied research that's going to move my company and my innovation forward. And I think and the same for government. So, I think sometimes we can think of this slightly in a disconnected way from what the reality of AI innovation and how AI is actually being developed and being deployed nationally and internationally.
Right, let's go back then to our original question, which is on research to market. So Europe's tech ecosystem, that we're always talking about the great scientific minds. So from that research and that body and that institution that Europe has, what are the difficulties in then getting it into markets?
I can start because we're talking about difficulties, and especially in French universities, it could be difficult because of the culture. To organize all the path to come from research lab or even talents beyond the students, it's really to have all the paths with incubator, accelerator, VCs. And it has been created, I think VivaTech is a quite good example, because we saw many French startups that appears in recent years. That was not the case before. And I would say it depends on the technology. For quantum computing, for instance, you need to come from the research lab. There's no other way to develop the technology. So I would say the difficulty is really to construct all the chain from the research output until the company with the tech.
Yes, no, very briefly. Actually, Lab to Market has been identified in the Startup and Scale-up strategy that was published by the European Commission in May, 1 year ago, actually. And they mentioned in that document, they really mentioned that there was an issue that actually they mentioned 2 valleys of death from Lab to Market, and then the second one being scaling up. And for the first one, they mentioned the talent issue as being one of something that we have to deal with in Europe. And from my point of view, from CEA, as my job actually is really to help researchers to transform their results into business. And that's true that we have a real issue with team building. Because lots of researchers, they don't want to create a startup. Actually, they don't want to work in a startup. They just want to do research. That's their job. Sometimes they can go within the startup, but they don't only want to have scientific or technical activities. And sometimes it's not their job to be a CEO. So the issue as a research organization is really to identify people who really want to join a startup as CEOs, because most of the time our researchers, either they don't want to or they are not able to because it's, well, a totally different job. But that's a real issue. And from CA point of view, it is one of the main cause of failure for our project of startups, I would say, before incorporation.
I think that's interesting. Amanda, do you agree that not everyone can be a CEO, that some people maybe they're better off staying in research?
Yeah, I mean, I think the common theme whenever I talk about sort of the research to impact part and research to market pathway is cultural, right? So it's you have to build a culture, you know, in my case, on campus at Imperial, where from student right through to established academic, it is a pathway that is available to them, that is encouraged, that where there is clear ways of facilitating that, but that at the same time, you don't have to do it, that you may have IP, but you don't actually have to be the CEO and leave and run the company. One of the things we do quite a lot of at Imperial is we're trying to work a lot more with our business school to try and bring those communities together in a more kind of sort of proactive way, particularly our business school students, who now I think we have a lot of business school students who will come to Imperial because they do want to be the CEO of an interesting tech startup. They know that their fellow students in engineering, natural sciences, medicine are where those great ideas are going to come from. So I think it's like creating new generational culture around kind of what the role of the academic is. And I mean, I will say as well, we've got some academics who are fantastic. See, and actually that's turned out to be what they then wanted to go off and do, and they're sort of serial entrepreneurs, and that's also fantastic. So I think we had a culture, maybe I would say a number of decades ago, where it felt very either or. You were either going to be an academic or you were going to move off into industry or into or start your own company. And actually now I think we're getting better at supporting people to take that path. The most important thing is that these ideas are getting out of the university and into market in the first place. And I'm very agnostic about how that happens. We just have to make sure we create those pathways.
Okay.
Yeah, if I may add something, so I completely agree with both arguments. What we try to do is really to develop entrepreneurship tracks for the students, even from the bachelor degree, to be in contact with the existing companies, to work on proof of concept, so to develop kind of IP. And I think that those students, when pursuing in a PhD or even stopping at a master level, they can take professors and maybe encourage a professor to contribute to the startup, even if it's very difficult to have professor. And also, a solution is really to mix, engineering school, business school. That's the key. I would say one of the key solutions.
Okay, can I flip the question there and ask: is there a danger then that maybe research loses these key people, these key students, because there's the allure of being a startup CEO? Because let's face it, we now see the kind of celebrity that comes with it. So is there a danger to AI research that a lot of these students they kind of want to go and become CEOs and launch these companies? Or is it also, as you say, that it's good that these ideas get to market?
I mean, I can answer very quickly from my perspective. I think there's sort of two pieces to this. I think one is around the students and one is around kind of current academic. And I think, I'm sure it's a challenge at universities, I mean, not just in Europe, but internationally, which is holding on to that research talent when the big AI labs are making very big offers to some of that top talent. And I think something we've really struggled with and really thought about, and, coming up with mechanisms to retain some time still to be back in the lab doing some of that frontier or discovery science, while also being able to work in what are often kind of also quite restrictive environments. So I think that's a journey we're probably all on, trying to work out how we manage that, because I think the last thing you want is to be losing some of the great thinkers in the AI space straight into the private sector and not working in the research ecosystem. I think with students, it being an academic is not for the majority of students anyway. So I think, as long as we're looking at giving them all the options and all the pathways, be that to go into industry, government, set up a company, stay in academia. I think it's our job as universities to just make sure that all of those pathways remain available, supported, and attractive, and we're not sort of signaling to push everybody down one path in particular.
I mean, it's interesting because actually, while I was here, I spoke to a student who had recently transitioned into a startup, and I'd asked him the reasons why. And he said, well, the thing is, with a lot of research, you have to come up with questions, but there's not real much impact in doing that. And so he wanted to go to a startup because he felt that he would have much more impact in doing that. So it's not necessarily about the money in this case, I would say.
Yeah, maybe to confirm indeed, I participated, it was 2 years ago in a European survey, and one of the questions that was asked to European startups is that what to you today, what you will use valorization a lot as a KPI to assess the performance of our startups, and to you, what could be the right indicator to use? And the first answer of startups at that time was the impact, which is not actually quite easy to measure and to assess. But the first answer, which was quite surprising, but the first answer was impact, environmental impact, social impact.
Yeah. Also to try to give some insight on the question, are we losing talents for research activities? I think it's not the same order of magnitude. For instance, in the big ecosystem of Saclay, we publish around 2,000 papers a year. On AI at large, not only new RIPS and ICML. It's impossible that we create 2,000 startups a year. And also, I want to add that, especially in AI, startups are also doing research. It's not only a research output that could be in, I mentioned quantum computing, but in AI, they continue to develop models. They work on data workflow to improve the model. So they work with a research lab. So I have the example of many startups that are still in the research lab. So are we losing talents for research, or are we producing research also in a complementary way by startups? And I have an example. Just a few minutes ago, there has been a signature of a joint lab between University of Paris-Saclay and a startup. So,
yeah, just to confirm, I fully agree with what you said. Well, I'd say it's specific because we don't have students. Well, we have some PhD students and postdocs, but not as in universities. It's a bit specific, but I fully agree, because it's the same for researchers when they leave CA to incorporate a startup. Actually, indeed, you can see that as you lose a talent from your lab. But the reality is that most of the time, if everything goes well, And if the startup incorporation has been supported by the lab, then once the startup is incorporated, they come back to the lab to carry out research with the lab. Many times they are hosted by the lab as well. So it's just a different way of collaboration, a different way of working together, but actually is not really not a lose for the lab.
So we should see both market and researchers working together, going back and forth. Is that what you've noticed?
Yeah, and maybe this leads into a slightly sort of another point around that sort of supporting research to market is then what is the infrastructure that is actually, and what's the ecosystem you're trying to kind of curate where you have that ease of movement between the university-based research, the startup-based research, and actually the larger industry-based research. And I think probably as much as in Paris as in London, you're trying to constantly create an ecosystem that has a bit of all of that mix, because that's where you get, that's where you get that incredible innovation and research interchange. So I think, sometimes particularly with science and AI research, you're making sure that you're providing the infrastructure, the incubators, the accelerators, but also spaces for startups and other industry to be part of that ecosystem more broadly. So, and then encouraging that movement between the three.
Okay, so talk me through a little bit about that structure. Does it work? Does it need improvement? Does there need more funding? Laurence, can you take that one?
About funding?
Can you help with funding and support?
Yeah. Well, about funding, I would say that we should maybe come back 5 years ago, when in 2021 ECAIE was created, and we should have a look of what has been done today until then. And I think, I think it's really impressive what has been done on that topic. I mean, I don't say that because I'm the ECAIE board, because actually I had nothing to do with it. I was not at the ECAIE board at the time, so it's not what I did. But I'm really impressed with what has been done, because through the ECAIE now we have really the capacity to support startup creation from the very first idea with the Pathfinder until scale up. You have Pathfinder, Transition Accelerator, STEP has been added in 2025, and 2 weeks ago the European Scale Up Fund has been announced in Brussels, and the target cost is 5 billion euros, which is huge. So I think really we've done, my message would be, we've done a lot, but there is still space for improvement, of course. I think one thing that can be improved is that I would say the jungle of funding sources. I mean, there are lots of funding sources at the regional scale, national scale, European scale. When I see just from CA how difficult it can be to navigate between all funding sources, and we are a research organization, I can't imagine how difficult it is for a startup to know where they should apply, what could be a good funding source for them, which is adapted to their level of maturity. So I think, yeah, the kind of simplification, more transparency would be useful. And also something that has been, many times I've heard from startups, is that when they participate in a European project, and if everything goes well during the project, it's had very good results, etc., it does not change anything for them for the next funding source, which means if everything has went well or not, they're at the same level of other projects for the next one. So maybe we will need really to promote, I would say, fast-track access. Once you've been in one, for instance, I don't know if you have been at the Pathfinder and you want them to apply to transition, and if you had really good results during the Pathfinder, you can have kind of fast track to the next funding source. And it is important because it will really also motivate researchers to do well, but it will also pave a kind of an innovation and funding journey for startups.
How do we keep researchers motivated then?
Researchers, we don't need to keep them motivated. by definition, a researcher is motivated. No, yeah, it's very difficult to say because really in artificial intelligence, it's a domain that is at the crossroads of many disciplines, so involving many researchers from computer science, engineering, and also all applied fields. And so that's why there's so many output, even if they are not motivated. Researchers want to publish, want to develop new knowledge, develop new tools. So I mean, that's the job. So they continue, but especially in this area, there's many options to develop more than research. I mean, even if algorithm cannot be patented, but there's many things that can be developed. So we go fast to the startup creation. And after I agree with everything is kind of difficult. And I think in France, yeah, since the last 5 years, it improves a lot from the very beginning to the scale up. After we can discuss, but so I would say that researchers continue to be motivated. If I can give a message for the French system, probably improving the salary of a researcher could be a solution. It's one of the worst salary in Europe for researchers. So.
Okay, and how about you, Amanda? Obviously, you're based in the UK, not in Europe, unfortunately. So are things a little bit different there when it comes to support for researchers?
Yeah, I mean, not in the European Union, but still in Europe, I think we like to, I think it's a really important distinction to make. I think there's a couple of points I'd like to make, particularly on the funding point. I often find in these conversations, it's really important that we focus on the innovation pathway and supporting that. But I think a point that we always try and make, certainly from the UK system, is just do not take your eye off the funding of the discovery, science and research that is going to be providing us with the next tech revolution in 20, 30, 40 years, the thing we just never thought of. And I do think it's really important that the research community makes that point, because we can get a lot of focus at the translational end, but that doesn't happen without the sort of decades of fundamental science that goes before that. So I think, in a way, to your point, that some scientists, that is what's motivating them to just invest, to have the space to still be investigating questions and challenges as part of their research. I think more broadly, the funding system in the UK has definitely improved. But I think to the point you made much earlier around the scale-up challenge, it is that point at which you're looking to the private sector to really pile in and pick up the mantle and keep that funding stream going. And I think there's been a huge amount of work in the UK to think about how we unlock things like our pension funds to be able to be more, to make investments in our innovation ecosystem. There is a huge amount of work trying to learn from the Bay Area, from Silicon Valley, about how you bring VC capital into your ecosystem in a way that's productive. And actually that's as much about, I think, teaching and learning within our ecosystem about what their expectations are, the pace that they work at, which I just think is culturally different. We take some of our entrepreneurs to the Bay Area every year, and they come away with many lessons, but one of the biggest things they learn is just pace. The way things move and the way ideas move in the Bay Area ecosystem is very different. So VC investors are looking for that when they come here. So I think these are things we're really working on. I think one of the pieces of the puzzle that we've been involved in is actually working with VC firms in London and in the UK and in Europe to try and actually upskill them on AI, deep tech, some of these technologies, how you assess risk. Because a lot of these firms are being asked to invest in technologies that they are perhaps unfamiliar with. So there's a real kind of upskilling across all the different players in the ecosystem so that we can make good investments, but also at the right time and at the pace that this innovation is actually taking place.
Okay, and Laurence, once these researchers come and they might work for the startups or start their own startups, another conversation I had on this stage earlier, I'd asked the founders of startups what advice they would give to other founders And they said, be prepared to fail. You know, it's hard. It was a tough love message, but it was like life out there is difficult. You know, a lot of things might not take off. It might not go well. So what is, you know, is it a big adjustment going from researchers to markets?
You mean to move from the position of researcher to the position of CEO, you mean?
Or to working in a startup?
To work in startup. Yeah, it's well, a total change in your life, and not only professional life, personal life as well. So that's why I say I fully also understand when I mean, I discuss with researchers and they tell me I don't want to go in a startup. I mean, I fully agree. It's a big risk. You will change all your life most of the time. And it's a totally different job as well. And I mean, I really I'm really respectful of researchers who tell me, I like my job, I don't want to change. I mean, at the beginning I was a researcher, so I fully agree that you could really like doing research and that you don't want to change. But yes, it's a huge change in the life. And I'm always impressed by researchers who has this ability to change and to get involved in a startup. It's really high risk for them. And just, if I can quote what has been said to me by a researcher, I was really impressed when he told me he became, when he became CEO of his startups, he told me, Laurence, when I was a researcher, I was really well known worldwide because I have lots of scientific papers. I was invited in lots of conferences. Now that I am a CEO, I am nobody.
That's fascinating.
But, well, it's, I mean, yeah, for him it was really difficult. It was really, he has really chosen to change his professional life.
Frédéric, would you say the same?
Yeah, I fully agree. I think it's a very personal choice. But I think it's possible also to encourage. And in terms of public policy, things have changed in recent years. For instance, the French strategy on artificial intelligence, so they provide funding to academic system. And 3 years ago, the mission the government asked for was really on education, training, and research. I mean, the pillars of universities, schools, and so on. Now, from 2024, another pillar is innovation. And so it means that we have some KPIs to provide in terms of startup creation, in terms of fundraising, in terms of students that follow entrepreneurship tracks. And so, I mean, it encouraged or it enforced or encouraged, I don't want to decide, but to create an ecosystem that will help professors, also students, professors, researchers, to go to a startup and probably to move from a professor to a CEO. And that's very difficult. Actually, I'm a professor, so I have, all these H-index citations. And when you create a company, so I created a couple of years ago a company, you are really nobody. Because you have to say, okay, you have to explain each time the same thing. That is my tech. That's what for it is important. So it's very difficult, especially for people with, 50 years old. They have a long career, so they are expert. I mean, international expert in their domain. So, yeah, it's very, very personal choice.
Okay, so we've spoken a lot about the challenges, but let's become a little bit more upbeat here. So what are we doing well when it comes to research and the beginning of coming to market?
Well, a short answer is, I don't think it's disputed that when you come to Europe, the density of research talent and ideas that are being generated, we have plenty of amazing cutting-edge ideas and research taking place across Europe. And that is to be celebrated. I think sometimes we do dwell too much. We spend a lot of time talking ourselves down And again, that's something we sort of talk about Imperial and within London is, actually, we are really big players in this space. We have our challenges, but I think some of the freshest, most innovative thinking is still coming out of the research ecosystem across Europe. And really, it's sort of the question is more how are we supporting that, how are we leveraging that, and how are we encouraging that as much as possible.
So is it a case of us talking ourselves down? I know in France, something we tend to do anyway. Is it something that applies, do you think, or do you think there's other things that what else are we doing well?
Do you mean specifically on IA or more
Yeah, in
globally?
AI research.
Well, I would say that we have really, in terms of IA, two things. It's not specifically on research, but two things where we can really differentiate ourselves. First thing is values. I mean, ethic, trust, transparency, stuff like that. I think we really have strong values in Europe that we try to defend as much as possible. And I really believe that it can become a real competitive advantage for Europe. And a second thing I would like to mention, which is to me very important, which is not IA specific, well, specific to IA, but which is of importance, is energy. Because we all know that artificial intelligence consumes a lot of energy. And we also know that in Europe, we have a great advantage with, nuclear technologies, small modular reactors, advanced modular reactors, that will be needed for IA. And I think also it is really, I would say, a competitive advantage that we have in Europe for IA.
Okay, Frédéric, something positive.
It's difficult to add something, but yeah, I would say that in Europe we have all the ecosystem, I would say the pipeline from infrastructure to talents, development, education, research activity, innovation, and we are trying to create that more and more. There has been some European funding for that, and all those ecosystems are connected. And that's the big advantage of academic system. All the students, they move from one year to another, in another country, in another university. So I would say we have a good, excellent ecosystem. For AI, I would say that, from the French perspective, especially on mathematics, the School of Mathematics is very good, and to answer the question about ethics, especially explainability, transparency, robustness of those systems, it's really tough research activities, and especially it's for mathematicians. So I think we can develop human AI. AI with AI model with human values. European values, and that would be the next. I think that would be the next step of AI development. Smallest model, but with shared democratic values.
Okay, my last question as we run down on time is, in the next 5 to 10 years, where do you see the research to market area going for AI? Is it going to be as important, more important? Do you think collaborations will get stronger? How do you see it going?
That's a big question to end on. Maybe putting the sort of geopolitical context to one side, I think one of the things, certainly, we're here with the European Centre for AI Excellence. We are at Imperial hosting a Centre for AI-driven innovation. I think what we're going to see and what we should see is a real acceleration around AI adoption. Into critical sectors, so the intersection and the convergence of AI with with other technologies and with other sectors, and I think Europe really can play a very, very, very key role in that. We're very well set up to do so.
I'll ask you the same question. Next 5 to 10 years, where do you see AI research and research to market going?
Well, I think there's no reason that it should not accelerate, actually. We have excellent research on that topic in Europe, and we've proved over the last 5 years that we could be also excellent in creating startups. I think there are more creation today of startups in Europe than in the US. So I'm quite optimistic.
Same question to you, Frédéric.
So I would say adoption is really the next step, but not only in the market, but for the society, because there's no market if the citizens are not educated to AI. And if I go more into technological detail, I would say that all the LLMs and agentic AI are deployed in the company, but for transverse activities. The next revolution is really to integrate AI in the business unit lines, so on specific business use cases, and that's, I would say, the most difficult part, because you need all the pipeline with the data, whatever the sectors, or energy, finance, defense, and so on. So the next step is adoption, but with dedicated AI system in the vertical business line.
Okay, well, let's look forward to that then. Thank you so much to my guests. Thank you so much to VivaTech and the European Centre for AI Excellence for holding this session.
Thank you very much to you four. And without going all the way to 5 to 10 years, I can tell you what's going to happen in actually 5 minutes. And in 5 minutes, we will be talking on this stage about how from digital government to the agentic state, we can build AI-ready public institutions. That will start in 5 minutes. Well, now 4.